Okay, Wayne Defrancesco here, and welcome to WayneDefrancesco.com. And as you can see, today we're going to look at the swing of one of my favorite players of all time, Trevino. If you've watched some of my videos, you've probably seen that I like to comment on certain things in a golf swing. Trevino doesn't do all of them. You can see him immediately lift a little bit in the backswing, but after that, he is one of my models as far as compression into the ground and lower body movement, and the utilization of the shaft plane as the optimum angle to approach and work through impact. So we've got a couple of stable cameras. I've got a lot of swings of Trevino's. Again, it's back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's difficult to find angles and stable cameras and such, but we'll do the best we can. Here, obviously, at the British Open, number 18, there's the flag. It's over to the left, so he's aiming to hit the ball probably a little right of that pin. So the camera's a little bit inside of him, but the good news is that the camera is stationary, so that means we can draw some lines and check out what he's doing with his golf swing. So let's take a look at this particular swing, and let me make it so it fills up the screen here. Alright, so first thing Trevino would do, interestingly, was align himself pretty far to the left. I'd say in the neighborhood of 30, 40 degrees left with his body. He wasn't really aiming to the left. He was using the open stance as a function to control his pivot movement. It's just something that he worked out while hitting a million balls. So what would happen is that he could make a large hip turn and a real deep hip turn with his right leg, but since the hips were preset open to the left, his net movement from relative to a square stance was more of a hip rotation that was somewhat akin to some of the more modern players who are more athletic and built a little differently. So enabling himself to make that big hip turn but not twisting his right side super far behind him gave him an advantage. So if we watch the takeaway, you'll see a little bit of a lift, see his head pop up above the line. The hands are definitely working away from the body. Again, it's not a perfect angle, so don't compare this to anybody else who's got a down the line view. We're just looking at general ideas here. So you can see the left arm roll up the chest. So this would mean that in the backswing, his shoulders are not swinging on a very vertical plane here. It's fairly flat shoulder turn. Now, this is where everything starts to change in transition. This is a real different pattern here. Out, and then the top of the swing position is under that halfway back position. So this is way out in front of him, and then already beginning to loop in. And then as the club comes down, watch the lowering. So you don't go much lower than that. Now, what that allows him to do is to drop that right forearm on the plane. Look at the shaft. Look at the shaft go around on that original shaft plane. Pretty much the guys that are the best at that, if you look at the way that comes around, are Gary Player and Ben Hogan. So when you look at Trevino, Player, and Hogan, there are three guys who weren't the biggest guys, and they found a way to give themselves ultimate control of the ball. So there's three of the best ball strikers in the history of the game. They all lowered. They all used the shaft plane. And now check the hips out. So you know how I like to draw the box. So you'll see in the backswing that Trevino let his right leg straighten up a bit, not locked, but just pretty straight, but real deep. And then in the forward swing, he had the motion that, it's something that I try to teach all the time. Players ask me, why do my legs shoot out from under me? If you compare Trevino and Ballesteros, you'll see the complete opposite in body movement. So here's the right hip and leg driving inward. I like to call it 45. So Trevino's already aiming over there with his feet. So he's driving that thing in, and look at that movement there. So you'll also note that I like to draw the angle of the left shoulder to the waist. So he doesn't have a steep shoulder turn and trunk movement, but watch what he does in the forward swing. So this makes this thing especially unique, because if I draw this thing now, look at that. I mean, he's reduced that by a huge amount. So very, very cool movement. Now if we go to a more forward view here, again, this is not a perfect angle, but it is stationary, so that's good. And since he didn't really move too much, the very start of the takeaway, we can watch at least what his hips are doing here. So you'll see him stay nicely in the box on the backswing here. And then here's the move in the forward swing. There's a couple things to watch with this. One is the way the left foot plants. When it plants, you won't see the weight dig into the toe. Even though the foot is retracted back, you'll see the weight drive toward the outside edge of toward the back of the foot over here, not toward the toes, which indicates that the initial push, like we just saw, is the right leg angling left of the target by a bunch. Now look how much movement he's got. Again, not a perfect angle, but that should tell you that there's a significant amount of lateral. You can just see his hips moving against that bush. Watch the right leg action. He's not really using his knees here. You see the right leg is actually straightening somewhat. The foot is rolling in, so I like to get my weight up on the inside of the ball of the right foot, with the right leg driving the left hip forward and around. Now a lot of players in this area would be already elevating up. And Trevino stayed down and rotated down and through it. Now you'll see as he hits the ball, if you watch the movement of his cap, he probably would have hurt himself pretty badly if he didn't rotate the chin along with the shoulders. So he is moving his head to watch the ball fly. And if we look at that, if we look at this again, this transition move, look at the depth and the downwardness there. So the sequence is off the ground. To me, it goes from the ground, it bypasses the knees, and it goes right up into the pelvis area. And then the waist is a slide. Now that word slide is used pejoratively by a lot of instructors. I believe the best players all slide. But when you slide on an angle, in this case left of the target by at least 45 degrees, I think what that does is it induces rotation immediately, and it keeps the lateral movement from getting stuck. If you slide toward the target, you're going to have a hard time recovering. Now, let's look at a couple different swings here. So the camera's on him hitting a wedge. And what we can see here, there's another evidence of that forward movement even with a short iron. But watch the line of compression after impact there. So I've shown you this a bunch of times too. is that if you want to control the ball, you'll get your hands in front of the ball. So he's hitting this ball here. So you can see how far forward leaning that is. And then after impact, look at the sustain. Sustain is, to me, is the angle of the right wrist coupled with the flatness, roundness of the left into and beyond impact. Now at the same time, you might think that looks like a block, but it's not. The face is rotating because the arms are staying with the chest here. That's going to rotate the club face without any significant flipping or turning over of the wrists and the hands. So there's the knockdown wedge shot, which he was famous for. Just a great ball striker as far as wedge control. A lot of spin, not too much height. Now, here's a good close-up view of the takeaway. You'll see the hands work away from the body. The left wrist will bow. I would not teach this, but it's certainly cool to watch Trevino put it together. Now, one of the reasons I don't teach it is that most people, when they start bending that wrist back, bowing the left, will keep the club head too low to the ground. You notice that Trevino will lift the club enough to keep it above the right elbow going back. So the shaft is not getting behind him. The club face is going to be a little shut when you bend your wrist like that, unless you have a super weak grip, which Trevino did not. Now, this looks like it might be getting a little steep. Now here's the magic move. Now another thing to note here is that with the open stance, note how little the hips are rotated from square, although from the open stance they've moved quite a bit. So I have, in my own swing, I have a distinct inability to restrict my hip movement because of my back, so the open stance is helpful to me, and I think Trevino used it for the same reason. Now you see the wrist is still flat. Now this is the magic move. Look at the shaft shallow and the right upper arm come inward. So this is something to consider here if you're looking at your swing. You've got the elbow coming this way and the shaft going that way. So I prefer to think of that as squeezing the arms together while letting the shaft drift back and fall against the right index finger right there. Now you can see, and this is something evident if you just saw me do the videos of Graham McDowell and Dustin Johnson, you'll see that this angle here in that left wrist, preset by the shut wrist position, is just carried down through the ball and around to the left pretty significantly. And that gives you, so you can see here as he comes through, if you thought that was blocked, take a look at this. Look how left that release goes. Alright, so some interesting stuff. One of the great players, a very unique action. Some of the best lower body movement of all time. You just won't see anybody do it any better. So there you go, Lee Trevino.